Good afternoon once again. The title of the sermon this afternoon is The Hand That Rocks. Now, the hand that rocks is not Lady Gaga or Miley Cyrus or Caitlyn Jenner or any number of other celebrities that we may hear about today. What actually, quote, rocks are not the rock stars, but rather those who embrace the motherhood for the divine honor it is and the blessing it bestows upon not only the family, but also the world. There is a 19th century poem that I'd like to quote because I think it captures what that is. It was written by a certain William Ross Wallace, and you probably will recognize the short excerpt. The short excerpt is, "The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world." I'm sure you've heard of that, but I'd like to, this afternoon, read the entirety of the poem because I think it captures motherhood as we honor it this weekend. Blessings on the hand of women. Angels guard its strength and grace. In the palace cottage hovel, oh, no matter where to place. Would that never storms assailed it, rainbows ever gently curled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Infancy is the tender fountain, power may with beauty flow, mothers first to guide the streamlets, from them souls unresting grow. Grow on for the good or evil, sunshine streamed or evil hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Woman, how divine your mission here upon our natal sod. Keep, oh, keep the young heart open, always to the breath of God. All true trophies of the ages are from mother love impearled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Blessings on the hand of women, fathers, sons, and daughters cry, and the sacred song is mingled with the worship in the sky. Mingles where no tempest darkens, rainbows evermore are hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. I think that captures in a very poignant form what motherhood has contributed to the world down through time. It cannot be overemphasized. It cannot be overvalued. It is, however, in our contemporary society, often done so. Mom, being a mother is no longer seen in the same light as it once was. And we'll go to biblical scriptures on that. But before we go there, I'd like to read you a contemporary version of this 19th century poem. We lack hands to rock the cradles. And notice the different form that it takes. Stressed will be the hand of women who lack the strengths of angel guard, who in palace, office, house, and home hold the role of mom in low regard. Stress and strain and empty dreams accompany those who have been fooled. We lack hands to rock the cradles, yet wonder why the world's unruled. Tender fountains come raging rabbits, power flows from poisoned wells. No mother's hand to guide the streamlets, so languish day and overwhelmed. As evil grows while good retreats, generation future remains unschooled. We lack hands to rock the cradles, then wonder why the world's unruled. Mission divine, lo, mission mine, war upon our natal sod. Me, myself, and I conspire to defy the blessed will of God. In pursuit of fortune for fleeting fame, yet natural law remains unfooled. O lack of hands to rock the cradles, no wonder why the world's unruled. Blessings still on hands of women who embrace eternal role divine. whose sacred mission remains the same. Only mothers make lives that shine. Embrace it, men, embrace it, women, till all the world becomes unfooled. No lack of hands to rock the cradles, birth a world so deftly ruled. I mean, we live in a culture in which the traditional family is under attack. And I think it is appropriate on Mother's Day weekend to review the biblical role of motherhood as well as marriage and look at it from the perspective of these two contrasting poems. We'll look at them, and there are 4 verses, and we'll look at and cite in on a couple of them and then take a look at what the scriptures say. So let's take a look at the first lines of both poems. The first one says, "Blessings on the hand of women. Angels guard its strength and grace." Contrast it with, "Stressed will be the hand of women who lacks the strength of angel guard." Come with me over to Luke chapter 1, and in Luke chapter 1 we'll read a passage that I think gives a perspective on how motherhood was seen and childbearing was seen in the New Testament. Luke chapter 1, we'll begin looking at this topic in verse 28. This is the birth announcement, the proclamation by the angel to Mary. "And having come in, the angel said to her, 'Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women.'" I mean, the perspective of the angel, and remember the contrasting poems, put motherhood under angel guard. The angel came to Mary and announced and said, "Blessed are you among women." But when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying and considered what manner of greeting this was. Then the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Highest. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David." Now, if you can, I mean, it's hard to imagine what this must have felt like as a young woman, most likely still in her teen years, being confronted with an angel with such a message. But the point that I wish all of us to take away from here is the high regard that was given to this young woman who was about to embark on the journey of motherhood. It was not seen, as it is today, as something to be avoided, to be something that is somehow a burden, but rather, in this particular case, an honor which would bestow upon her in ages to come honor among all women. Blessed will you be among women. Then Mary asked a very practical question. "How can this be, since I do not know a man?" And the angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you. The power of the highest will overshadow you. Therefore also the Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God." So the Immaculate Conception, as it is called in theological terms, was explained here. Verse 36, the angel continues, "Now indeed Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age, and this is now the 6th month for her who was called barren, for with God nothing will be impossible." Then Mary said, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word," and the angel departed from her. I mean, Mary's reception of the message, in contrast to the husband of Elizabeth, who is mentioned here, is quite stark. She accepted her role with grace. Continuing in verse 39, now Mary arose in those days and went into the hill country with haste to the city of Judah, to a city in Judah, and entered the house of Zacharias and greeted Elizabeth. And it happened when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, that the babe leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Then she spoke out with a loud voice and said, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. I mean, again, I think just reading through here helps us to understand the perspective of the culture of their day in contrast with what we see today. Womanhood, motherhood in particular, was valued, and so was the fruit of the womb. In this case, still in the womb, in contrast to some of the statistics I will cite later in the sermon. Verse 43, but why is this granted to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For indeed, as soon as the voice of your greeting sounded in my ears, the babe leapt in my womb for joy. Blessed is she who believed, for there will be fulfillment of those things which were told her from the Lord. And then we have here the song of Mary. And Mary said, my soul magnifies the Lord. Now think about it. Mary was, as she mentioned to the angel, a single mom in this case. She was betrothed to Joseph, but not yet married. And yet she, having understood the honor that was given her, magnified the Lord in song, rather than bemoaning the burden that had been given to her. You know, we live in a world, brethren, and we should note this, where evil is being called good, where blessing is being called burden, where darkness is being called light, and light is being called darkness. And unless we continually go back to the Bible to understand what is in actuality the truth, we will be influenced by the culture of our day. We are immersed in it. Actually, what I should say, we are influenced by the culture of our day. It is unavoidable. It's unavoidable. For he has regarded the lowly state of his maidservant. For behold, henceforth all the generations will call me blessed. For he who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. I mean, the great thing that had been done to her was to be seen as an unwed mother. And that is something that would follow Joseph and Mary throughout their lifetime, including up into the ministry of Jesus Christ, in which he was considered by some to be a bastard son. And yet, she saw it as a great thing. And his mercy is on those who fear him from generation to generation, for he has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham and his seed forever. And Mary remained with her about 3 months, and then returned to her house. That was the perspective of the New Testament. That is what the mother of Christ was, the way she looked at her responsibility as a mother. Blessings on the hand of woman, angels guard its strength and grace. And I think this story of the angel appearing to Mary certainly illustrates the truism of the poetic verse that we read at the beginning. The first mother mentioned in the Bible, of course, is Eve. In Genesis 3:20, let's go back there. Genesis chapter 3 has both negative and positive to say with respect to motherhood. But let's take a look at what Adam called his wife after he had been condemned to go out and work and earn his living. It was the sweat of his face. In verse 20, Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Also for Adam and his wife, the Lord made tunics of skin and clothed them. In the preceding verses here, if we'll maybe just take a moment here and read them, we also might get an inkling of where the idea of motherhood may have started having a negative connotation. In verse 14, so the Lord said to the servant, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all the cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. So here you already have a prophecy looking forward to the time of the message that Gabriel delivered to Mary millennia later. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So the pain of childbirth was prophesied from here. But down through the ages, motherhood and childbirth and childbearing was seen as a blessing, something that was an honor to seek instead of something, a burden to be avoided, as it is largely seen today. So let's go and take a look at an example of this in the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 29. Genesis chapter 29, one of the repeating themes in the Old Testament among the patriarchs was the quote-unquote shame of the barren woman, or the woman that was unable to conceive. And here we have the story of the complicated family constellation of Jacob, having fallen in love with Rachel and worked for her for 7 years and ended up with her older sister. We'll pick up the story in Genesis chapter 29 in verse 25. What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I have served you? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. I mean, here's just a classic, human... Well, then, if it be so, why not talk about it? At least let me know. And we could at least have renegotiated. But instead, he gave him a bad deal. But he had a solution here. Fulfill her week, and fulfill her week, meaning the wedding feast. And we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. I mean, he was a shrewd businessman. He got 7 years of labor for one daughter, and now he figured out a way to get another 7 years. And Joseph, being a young man, fell for it. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, so he gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife also. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben and said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. So in that culture, the idea of being able to give birth was seen as a high honor and a way in which, in this case, to attract the attention of her husband. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has also therefore given me this son. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again. I mean, the story just continues. Now, if that were to happen in our culture, people would start to kind of look, what's going on here? I mean, all those kids. But it's amazing how things have changed. I mean, the older generation that is sitting here among us will easily recall when large families were common. And people relied on their families in order to have, quote-unquote, social security. The sexual revolution of the 60s has changed that, and I think influenced us as well, to where families have become much smaller. But nature, as we heard in the sermonette, finds an equilibrium. And one of the reasons, and one of the facts that that no politician will be able to solve is the social security problem. People are living longer because of the medical advances that we have made. We have a problem, and the problem is that no matter which political party or what clever arguments you come forward, we just simply did not have enough kids to support the overhead of an older generation. So the Bible had it right after all. Children, as we will read later, are a heritage, a blessing from the Lord. Let's take a look at the second verse that we read in the contrasting poems. Infancy is the tender fountain, power may with beauty flow. I have said, and I think it is accurate, that by the time a child is 5 years old, parents are done. I mean, the child is more or less formed. The personality and the instruction, the tender fountain that, as the poem said, streamlets flow from the fountain, have been formed and shaped, and a direction has been set. By contrast, tender fountains become raging rapids, and power flows from poisoned wells, is far too often the case in our culture today, where motherhood is not valued, and power flows from poisoned wells. Children do not have the benefit of receiving what we will read here in Proverbs chapter 1, the full instruction and benefit of the nurture of a mother. Proverbs chapter 1. We'll take a look at verse 8. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, or the instruction of the mother. The influence of a mom is generational. I mean, as is the influence of a father. I mean, the studies show today that the influence of parents, despite the fact that their role has been minimized and it is no longer valued in the way it should be, still remains the primary programmatic force in an individual's life. Whether the parents were good parents or bad parents, whether you had a good mom or a bad mom, there is an inherent desire for the child to please him or her. That is just a natural relationship created by God that is very powerful. So we must never underestimate the influence that we can and should have. And I'm very sympathetic to young mothers today who struggle with balancing all the responsibilities of life and the pressures of, if you choose to be a full-time mom, to be seen as someone that is, not quite fulfilled. It's crazy when you think about it. What could be more important? I'm challenging you. Tell me, what could be more important than to nourish and influence and educate and instruct the next generation? Because it is the next generation that is going to live on. Not the technology that I conceived or invented, or the job that I had, or the great career that I made prior to being 30. All of those things may be well and good, and might even fall within the confines of Proverbs 31, as long as the priorities remain intact. But those things are fleeting. The permanence and our only ability to live on into the future is through our children. Because all of us, I think, everyone in here, I believe, is mortal. And from my reading of history, there hasn't been one mortal human being that has gotten out of here alive. That's something that modern science cannot change, despite reports on the internet to the contrary. I saw a report, I think it was in the last week, that immortality is theoretically possible. And they were talking about, how to do it with genetic engineering. Well, we will wait and see. The only way for us to live and have influence to the good or the bad into the future is through our offspring. So what could be more important than guiding those streamlets, shaping them into a path that will go multi-generational? And it's amazing when you hear people talk, listen to conversation, how often people say, well, my grandfather or my grandmother said, and I learned my grandmother used to say, or my mother used to say. And you pick up bits and pieces that show the influence that this particular role had. Let's go over to 1 Timothy, or might be 2 Timothy. 1 or 2 Timothy. I'm going to be on the safe side. I know it's not 3 Timothy. Second Timothy chapter 1. Here we see the generational influence of mother and grandmotherhood. Verse 3, I thank God, whom I serve with a pure conscience, as my forefathers did, as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you. which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. Now, it's interesting how this is framed. He said, when I bring to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, but then he backtracks. He backtracks and said that it was first in his grandmother, then in his mother, and then he actually calls in question the statement that he had just made, that I am convinced or persuaded is also in you. So the faith that had been handed down 2 generations to Timothy, Paul's servant, was beginning to languish. And he, in order to stir it up, as it says here, therefore I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands, etc., etc. In order to bring this back to his mind, he did what? He said, wait a minute. This faith that is languishing in you, you saw it demonstrated in your mom and your grandma's life. You know, it's time for you, I'm paraphrasing, it's time for you to get with it. It's time for you to stir it up, get with it, and act out the influence that shaped you. Unfortunately, that influence can also be negative. We'll take a look at a couple of examples. And, you know, that's, I've seen that as well. You know, you have grown adults in their 40s and 50s and maybe even older who had a horrible childhood, abusive parents who make a bad name for all things fatherhood or motherhood. And yet that child, in some warped way, still is trying to somehow please their mother. On the one hand, as we celebrate Mother's Day and we need to elevate the influence of mothers, we must also, on the other hand, recognize the decimating negative influence that you can have in that role as well. And we see a lot of bad examples in our world today. I mean, in most cases, it is more a matter of neglect than it is a matter of abuse. But there is plenty of abuse as well. Let's take a look at 2 Chronicles chapter 22. 2 Chronicles chapter 22. Second Chronicles chapter 22, and we're going to look at verse 2. And Ahaziah was 42 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Ahathliah, the granddaughter of Omri, and he also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab. For his mother counseled him to do wickedly. Here you have an example of a mother influencing, in this case, a king, to do wickedly, and it had an enormous impact on the nation. Fortunately, he only ruled for a little bit over a year. If you look at the corresponding scripture over in 1 Kings chapter 22, verse 52, it says he reigned for 2 years, so it was parts of 2 years. And then let's go to a New Testament example that we probably have all heard about. Matthew chapter Matthew chapter 14. In some ways, the culture of Christ's day was not that different from ours. And here we have the story of John the Baptist being beheaded. Now, John, my namesake, made the mortal mistake of telling King Herod that the wife that he had was not his legitimate wife. And Herod didn't seem to be that bothered by it, but Herodias, his wife, did not like it at all. So we pick up the story here in verse 6. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Therefore, probably under the influence of wine, he did what monarchs have done down through time. He promised her whatever she might ask. So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." This young girl was so influenced by her mother that she asked for the execution of John the Baptist. Let's take a look at the third verse. "Woman, how divine your mission here upon our natal sod." By contrast, mission divine, lo mission mine, war upon our natal sod. There is a war afoot. It is the war that has had the most casualties of anything in modern times, and it is being waged on, as the poet put it, natal sod, in the womb. Childbearing, let's take a look at some politically incorrect verses in the Bible. 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14. Here is Paul saying his desire. "Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, giving no opportunity for the adversary to speak reproachfully." It's an interesting construct. Paul wanted widows to marry and bear children and manage the house, as we read over in Proverbs chapter 31, so that the adversary would have no opportunity to speak reproachfully. Now, I don't have time to go into all of the different aspects, but suffice to say that if the marriage unit, the traditional marriage unit, is not strong, and whether father or mother fails to fill his or her biblical roles, when that failure occurs, when we fail at our divine mission, the adversary will speak reproachfully. And right now, in our world, that is being preached from the housetops. What we are reading and seeing and accepting every day in our culture would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago. But I've got good news for you. You know what? Caitlyn Jenner, I don't care how he poses on Sports Illustrated, is never going to be a mom. I guarantee you that. Just ain't going to happen. I don't care who identifies as whom. It just doesn't work. It is, in one sense, it is shameful that I need to speak openly about such perverse things from the pulpit. But it is necessary, lest we become influenced and think, well, maybe it's not that bad. It is bad. It is perversity of the highest order. And it influences how we think about our roles if we're not very careful. 1 Timothy chapter 2, just a couple pages back. Here's Paul writing to Timothy. And this one, this one's really out of sync. Verse 13, for Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Now, depending on, my question to anybody that says this is a sexist statement is, so what's better? Being Adam and transgressing knowingly, having not been deceived, or being Eve, who the serpent did deceive and transgressed out of deception? I mean, both of them sinned. The consequences were the same, death. But, if anybody wants to make a case here that, well, the woman or the man or whatever, no. What's better? Tell me. To sin knowingly or to be deceived in sin? One is as bad as the other. But here is Paul's statement. He said, nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. So Paul is somehow equating the process of bearing children as somehow connected with salvation. And when you look at the Old Testament, clearly, in contrast to today, childbearing was seen as a great honor, instead of, as we see it today, as something that, just kind of upsets the, let me read from here, so that you can blame someone else, right? Here is a article by Grady Scott, Motherhood, Still the Most Important Institution, and he talks about the fact here that there was an Anna Jarvis that suggested Mother's Day. And here are some of the enemies of motherhood. A, the Playboy philosophy. This philosophy looks upon women as playthings and objects of lusts. Motherhood simply complicates the Playboy's fun. You see, many husbands have become infected with this philosophy, resenting the time that children take away from them. One father once complained to his friends, quote, "We had so much fun until that baby was born." This shows a selfish side. War upon our natal sod. Before we go there, Psalm chapter 127, verse 3 says this. Psalm 127, verse 3, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward." And, we are reaping the fact that our culture has fooled our generation into believing that children are a burden, not a reward. I have news for you. There will not be enough money in Social Security to pay for our retirement at ease. I've shared this with you before. My parents-in-law, when we all get together, there are how many now, Susan? 140 plus. Mother-in-law just had open heart surgery a week and a half ago. We'll probably stop in to see her on our way home. They live, it's not fancy. They have a little house. And when I get really, really stressed, I like to go there because life all of a sudden just becomes a lot less complicated. But you know what they got? They have Social Security. They're never going to have to worry about whether or not Washington prints money. is they have generations of people that will look out for their welfare. It is what it is. Let's take a look at some really startling statistics and just what we have done to motherhood. Here is a pie chart. You might be able to see it. It says 42%. 42% of all yearly deaths in the world are from abortion. We are killing nearly half of the blessings that were conceived. It is, as this says, a worldwide crisis. And you may have seen this pie chart, and you can't see it, but you have a pie chart that is darkened, and it has an insy-binsy little sliver at the top. Now, let me tell you what the insy-binsy little sliver signifies. It's the this is just for the United States. The insy-binsy little sliver are the deaths that resulted from the Civil War, World War II, World War I, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the War of Independence, the War of 1812, the Gulf War, and Afghanistan. One guess on what the rest of the pie is. Abortions in the United States. You know, we have a media that is obsessed with war casualties. Abortion, you don't hear anything about. It is the crime. It is the biggest crime of our time. So what are the top annual deaths in the United States? In the U.S., we have 580,000 people that die from cancer every year. We have 600,000 people that die from heart disease, and 121,000 who die from accidents. We abort 1.6 million babies a year. Mission divine versus mission mine. War upon our natal sod. Let's take a look at the fourth one. The fourth one here is, in both cases, more positive. Blessings on the hand of women, fathers, sons, and daughters cry. Blessings still on hands of women who embrace eternal role divine. You see, the thing that I find encouraging, albeit, sometimes challenging, is that God's way works. We are not guaranteed an easy path, but it is still as blessed today to be a mother as it was in Rachel's time, as it was at the time of Christ, and perhaps more than any other time, living in the time we do today, we can look back and reflect over the past 50 years or so what a divergence from these traditional roles have brought us. And, the catastrophe that will be upon us if we continue on the path that we've been on in the last 8 years in particular is also pre-programmed. But, we as a church have been, I think, to a certain extent, used to being out of step, if for no other reason than the observance of the seventh-day Sabbath and the holy days. It doesn't matter what culture you're in, it puts a sign on you. It sets you apart. So I guess I would challenge all of us within the range of my hearing that we give thought to, on this Mother's Day weekend, that we have an opportunity here to set the standard, to show the way that works, as opposed to embracing what this one author called a quote-unquote playboy lifestyle. Let's go take a look at a couple of scriptures with regard to the blessings on the hand of women that rock the cradle. Proverbs chapter 23. Proverbs 23, verse 25, let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. You know, there is something about a mother that is just, well, can only be described as motherhood. It is beautiful to behold. No discussion on this particular topic would be complete without turning to Proverbs chapter 31. Let's go there. Proverbs chapter 31. The virtuous mother. Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her. So he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil. All the days of her life she seeks wool and flax, and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household. And it just continues to go on and on. You know, managing the house, as Paul put it, is a complex, multi-talented affair. I saw a cartoon this morning as I was putting this together that said, Mom, we wanted you to have the day off on Mother's Day, so we hired you a replacement. And then there was a whole lineup. There was a taxi driver, a doctor, a teacher, forget what all the others were. And, I still remember as a young man, when I was working for Chrysler, you go out for dinner, people take you out, and, small talks, where are you from, what do you do, blah, 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 and then, after a while, it comes to what does your wife do? Well, I mean, we've got 2 children, and she stays at home. And they say, oh, okay. And the conversation quickly changes because, they felt sorry for me that I had such an inadequate wife that wasn't competent enough to be a mother and hold down a job. And if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you too. So I came up with a different tact. We talk about my job and how I'd done, and I'm an engineer, and we're building these things, and we did this, and we accomplished that. And so what does your wife do? I said, oh, my wife, she's a domestic engineer. Really? What's that? And then I'd explain. I had a lot of fun with that. It was, it was the best decision we ever made. We did not have much. My children will attest to that. But the fact that Susan chose that worthy career has paid huge dividends. And I recognize that not everybody can do that. And if you're in that situation, here's what I would put forward to single parents, people in situations where you need a double income. Children are really smart. I mean, they are really smart. If a child knows that mom has to go to work part of the day so they can eat, you can be assured that that will not have the same impact, that when a child knows that there is enough to eat, but mom just doesn't want to stay at home because it's too boring to be with me, it has an entirely different impact. If there's one thing that, I mean, I've mentioned this guy before, Mr. Radick, lived upstairs from us in Big Sandy when we lived out there, and he became kind of a grandfather figure to me because both of my grandparents had died. And one day I was ruminating or moaning or murmuring to him, whatever you might call it, about being concerned about my children and how they would grow up and what they might become. And he said, "John, don't worry about it." I said, "Really?" He said, "No, don't worry." He said, "They're going to grow up to be just like you really are, not what you pretend to be." I thought, oh. And you know, he had a way with his words, and there were many other things I learned from him. But I just say that because we live in a culture today in which the lower end of the wage spectrum has not moved. In fact, it has gone down in real terms over the last 15 to 20 years, and unless something really changes, I don't see that changing. I mean, there are many families where both parents have to work, or you won't eat. I mean, it's that simple. That does not mean that you cannot be a good father or mother, or that your children are going to be perpetually damaged because that need. Like I said, children understand the difference on whether or not it is necessity or some other reason. So as we conclude here, I'll go back to the poem, and this time I'm going to read the contrasting statements, because I think it will help us understand. That is, if I can find the poem in my pile here. Here we go. Blessings on the hand of women, angels guard its strength and grace. In contrast to, stressed will be the hand of women who lack the strengths of angel guard. In palace, cottage, hovel, oh, no matter where the place, would that never storms assailed it, rainbows ever gently curled. Who in palace, office, house, and home hold the role of mom in low regard. Stress and strain and empty dreams accompany those who have been fooled. We lack hands to rock the cradles, yet wonder why the world's unruled. In contrast to, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Infancy is the tender fountain, power may with beauty flow. Mothers first to guide the streamlets, from them souls unresting grow. In contrast to, tender fountains become raging rabbits, power flows from poisoned wells. No mother's hand to guide the streamlets, so languish they and overwhelmed. Grow on for the good or evil, sunshine streamed or evil hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. As evil grows while good retreats, generation future remains unschooled. We lack hands to rock the cradles, then wonder why the world's unruled. Women, how divine your mission here upon our natal sod. Keep the young heart open, always to the breath of God. Mission divine, lo, mission mine, war upon our natal sod. Me, myself, and I conspire to defy the blessed will of God. All true trophies of the ages are from mother love impearled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. In pursuit of fortune for fleeting fame, yet natural law remains unfooled. O lack of hands to rock the cradles, no wonder why the world's unruled. Blessed on the hand of women, fathers, sons, and daughters cry, and a sacred song is mingled with the worship in the sky. Blessings still on hands of women who embrace eternal role divine, whose sacred mission remains the same, only mothers make lives that shine. Mingles where no tempest darkens, rainbows evermore are hurled, for the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. Embrace it, men, embrace it, women, till all the world becomes unfooled. No lack of hands to rock the cradles, birth a world deftly ruled. Have a great Mother's Day.